r/AskReddit. Police officers of Reddit, what is your best I think we have the wrong person story? I've got two. From 25 years ago, when I was a cop, one on one side of the badge, and one from the other. The first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 feet tall, 250 pounds, long red hair, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I roll up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself, 6 feet, 250, red hair, red beard. I make contact with him. Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants, and it's time to go to jail. Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking I get his property off him. And while filling out the inventory happen to notice this guy's Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was my guy's landlord, and his twin brother from another mother doppelganger. When I'd said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig to the fact I hadn't said his name. He just heard the similar sounding name as his own. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side, I had just gotten off duty at 2 AM and was driving home still in uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling 4 drunks, and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just going to follow me a little to observe my driving, and he'd realize pretty quick I was sober and peel off. Instead another patrol car joined him, and another, and another. Then all 4 lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure, and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the hell was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights, and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explained what was going on. My car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. It was an interesting night. 2 of my colleagues, murder squad detectives, attended custody to meet a defendant answering bail. When they arrived at the custody desk there were a couple of people hanging around, waiting for their solicitors. They told the custody sergeant they were there for, insert name, and he pointed one of the guys out. They went up and introduced themselves and said they would be questioning him at another station. So all 3 got in the car and headed off. Whilst driving, they told the defendant what would be happening. On arrival he would be arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, questioned and either bailed or remanded. The guy was like, "You've got to be joking. Attempt murder? I was shoplifting." He was relatively calm, half laughing and shaking his head. A short time later one of the officer got a call from the custody sergeant. Their actual bail appointment had arrived. There were 2 defendants with the same name answering bail that day. They apologized to the non-murderous shoplifter, turned the car around, and headed back to bring the right person in for questioning. Keystone cops to the maximum. There had been a string of robberies, 7 in 2 weeks, in my neighborhood, so everyone was on high alert. I was home by myself, and one of my dogs started puking, so I rushed to let him outside, forgetting my dad had set the alarm. We had a silent alarm, so I had no clue it had been tripped, sending out a dispatch request to the local 520. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I'm young, home alone by myself, and had been told to never answer the door if I was alone. So I didn't. They kept knocking. Long story short, they broke the door down. They thought they had caught the burglars. Multiple cars. I vaguely remember there being a K9 unit involved, and the police had their suspect, a 9-year-old girl, crying her eyes out. I was not the group of thieves who ended up being caught about a week later. Not a cop, but the wrong person in question. There is another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name. Exact same spelling, the only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks they didn't qualify for. They would cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies himself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for him. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. A high pressure situation, demanding access to my financial records, threats of subpoenas, and further legal action. So I started to doubt this was an actual police officer and was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and records keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yep, they wanted the other guy. I live in a small town in rural England, and we used to get some trainees/new police officers from the Met there for their training. Me and some of my friends were teenagers. We were walking to the supermarket, because what else is there to do in a small town pre-internet? Suddenly from out of nowhere this police car comes screaming out of nowhere, sirens going, and screeches to a halt in front of us. A young guy, must have only been about 5 years or so older than us, jumps out and starts giving us the whole hairdryer treatment. He lines us up and starts taking our statements of what we had been up to in the last hour / gloating at us. You lads are in trouble now. Criminal damage, trespass, theft. You have really screwed up. With him was a local Bobby, and he came up to each of us in turn after the younger guy had grilled us and said very jovially, "Now don't worry lads, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. We've had some reports of a break-in. You don't match the preliminary description, and I'm sure we'll get this cleared up when we get the more detailed description come through." So the more detailed description comes through the radio, and the young guy is wearing the biggest shit-eating grin you've ever seen. The description didn't even remotely match, and honestly the young guy looked so disappointed we all ended up feeling sorry for him. So yeah, that was probably quite embarrassing for him. Not an officer, but I live in a neighborhood in 90 that is going through a major revitalization right now. So it's very much in a transitional phase. We rent a house from a good friend of ours. He bought the house from some garbage people who had lived there for a long time. These people sold, made drugs, there was violence, prostitution, everything. In general the house was disgusting, unlivable, really, just the worst. Well, the scumbags who lived here still try to use our address even after 5 years. About a year and a half ago one of the dudes used our address to renew his driver's license at the BMV. He even had the audacity to leave a note for us to call him when the license came in. Fast forward a few months, around Christmas time, we are all sitting around, watching TV when we get a knock on the door. My husband answers it, and it's a SWAT team with guns drawn. They see my husband, who does not look like a methed out crackhead, and inside are our 2 little boys, my parents, and me nursing our baby, plus the Christmas tree and all the lovely trappings of our home. They immediately put their guns down, and my husband and I have a lovely chat with them. Yeah, they had our house surrounded, guns drawn, the whole shebang, looking for this dude who was wanted on some kind of violent felony. We were pissed at this dude, who I refer to as Big Nasty. Since everyone else isn't a cop, I was 16 and worked at a golf course mowing lawns and such. We got a call at home from the cops that said I'm a suspect in a hit and run accident because my plate hashes were on the car that drove away without stopping. The cops said the car was maroon colored, my car was grey. We told them and figured that was that. The next day at work there was a minor accident. A dumbass coworker pulled a metal rake too hard in the rack, holding it came down onto my forehead. It wasn't a deep wound, but it bled a lot. My boss took me to the ER to get my head super glued, and to be safe, took me home too. Thus my car stayed at the golf course. That evening a cop comes by and finds me with a head wound and my car is missing. I look quite guilty. By sheer luck, the cop calls someone after talking to my parents and discovers they got the guy and the plate numbers were close. I probably would have been arrested. I'm not a cop, but my mom had a story for this happen to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mom was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face, and the kicker, same name. They even showed my mom's actual information, which I won't list here, as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now on to my mom's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone, as she lived alone. She was reading a Stephen King book when she hears some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it. Lots of yelling. She had not seen the show which painted her as a criminal. Then suddenly bam. Her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her one-bedroom apartment, and she is arrested. She explained they had the wrong person. They claimed everything matched. Social security matched. DNA matched. Name matched. Photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mom's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mom. The end result is that when they created a profile for the criminal, they used my mom's information to start with. So when they arrested my mom, of course the information matched. It was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It wasn't until they took fingerprints from the scene of a crime they said she committed, and the prints didn't match, that they realized she wasn't the criminal. It's scary to think, if they had used her profile prints, rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she would have been still in jail today. It was basically a life sentence. Once again, not a police officer. I was on the receiving end. I'd been at a small bar listening to some live music with a friend. We leave a couple hours later, and less than a mile from the bar I get pulled over. No big deal. I pull into a circular driveway, and then I get scared. No fewer than 4 police cars surrounded us. 2 behind and 2 in front. They come to both sides and leave a number of officers at our windows, while they run our licenses. See, earlier, in between sets, a lady got on stage, and warned any women there not to walk home or accept rides from strangers. Apparently, there had been a number of abductions and rapes in the area. My friend and I ignored it. We were not alone, and we were not women. Finally, the cops give us our identification back and tell us we matched the description of the rapists. Didn't say how they determined it wasn't us, but apologized and sent us on our way. It wasn't until the next day we realized just how bad that could have been. Obligatory not a cop. A few years ago, my husband and I were having a lazy Sunday morning, making pancakes, blasting music, having a good time. There's a really loud banging on the door, and I rush over to answer it, thinking someone must have knocked a couple times before we heard it, and open it up to 4 police officers who push into our kitchen. 2 of them grab my husband and start telling him that he's being placed under arrest for a hit and run accident that took place in a city almost 2 hours away. Freaking out, my husband explains to the police that he was at work all night and just got home about an hour before that. He must have been really convincing, because 2 officers sat at our kitchen table with us, while the other 2 went outside to call my husband's workplace to confirm his story. Turns out, a car that we had sold about a year before that was involved in an accident that hit 3 parked cars and a woman the night prior. Woman had minor injuries, thankfully, but the driver was nowhere to be found. There was a clear video of our old car smashing into parked cars, hitting pedestrian, and a man jumping out of it shortly afterwards. When the police found the abandoned car and ran the VIN, it led them to our house. In Ontario, when you sell a vehicle, you're supposed to bring a slip into the Service Ontario Centre to prove that the ownership has transferred, but it's not really enforced, and there's no penalties for not doing it, because the person purchasing the vehicle needs to do the same to get plates, stickers, insurance etc. Obviously, and stupidly, we did not do this. Cops came back in, apologized for the mistake, gave us a half-hearted lecture about properly switching ownerships, and left. The dick that was actually driving the car was caught the next day. An officer called my husband to tell him, and made a joke about us having to pay any impound fees. Was a guy. Got pulled over a block from a local McDonald's. Officer explains he got a report that the manager at McDonald's reported that a guy about my description tried to grab the cash drawer from a register when she opened it to make change for him. When she resisted, he fled in a yellow Ford Limited. I happened to be driving a Ford Limited. I told him I wasn't the guy. Asked if the name of the manager who reported it was Tina. Yep. Well, then she would have told you my name when reporting the attempted robbery if I was the culprit. I had been working there as a manager for about 2 years and she would definitely have recognized me. He agreed that I was unlikely to be the culprit. I immediately drove over to find out what happened from Tina. Evidently she went aggro when the guy tried to grab the door and just grabbed both his hands and dug her nails into the top of his hands. Evidently it was all the guy could do to tear himself away and flee. Tina may have weighed 100 pounds wet. Not a police officer, but I'm in a class called Wildlife Law Enforcement, which is taught by a game warden. They have police powers and can be called in if backup is needed. My teacher is a great dude and he loves stories. Anyways, my local police force has a way of capturing people with outstanding warrants that may or may not be common. What they do is send a letter to the perp saying they want a price from the city. Apparently, however they deliver this makes it seem very legit. To receive your prize you have to go to the community center at a certain date and time. Then the police get you after you sign in for your prize. So in my city they set up this and sent a letter to a particular man with a very recognizable name. The day of the prize, claiming this very large old man comes in and is soon fighting against 3 officers in this community center, claiming he fought pretty damn hard thinking he was being jumped, but of course got cuffed and stuffed in the back of a squad car. The issue? They didn't check the important detail of age. They captured Senior when Junior was the one with the warrant. They assumed because of this man's very recognizable name that there could only be one. I remember when my son was 3 weeks old. It's 3 AM and I'm laying down on the couch. Baby is in his rocker. Suddenly there is loud knocking on my door followed by police. I thought for sure it was my friend coming back from the bar and they needed a place to crash. And they have done that police knock to me before. So I'm sitting there mad thinking, don't they know I just had a kid? Needless to say I didn't answer the door. Figured they could find somewhere else to crash. Next thing I know my door is kicked down. I grab baby and run towards the door and 4 or 5 police officers run in. They search my house with flashlights. Scared the crap out of my sleeping husband. My 5-year-old didn't wake up though, lol. Turns out they had the wrong address. They apologized and a week later they installed a new door for me. But holy fuck, that was scary. Not a police officer, but one night around 8 PM my fiance received a call. Officer, Derek, we have your health card. Tell us your whereabouts right now. Fiance, this isn't Derek. Oh, you sound like Derek. Your buddies ratted you out and gave us your number. Now where are you? I'm not Derek, and I'm not telling you where I am. Who are you? Oh, this is Officer Smith. Stop messing around and tell us your location. Derek. Again, Derek is not my name. How do I know you're a real officer? Oh boy, if you don't tell me where you are, you're going to be in much more trouble. My badge number is blank. Okay fine, I'm at home at blank. If you don't show up in a police car, I'm not coming out. He hung up the phone, dialed 911 calls. We live in a bad area and wasn't sure if this was a fake call or not. Operator verifies that it was a correct badge number. The officer called back. He apparently misdialed by one number. He apologized, but still blamed my fiance because you were being very defensive and sounded guilty. Not a police officer, but a wrong person. I was sitting in my apartment. Girlfriend was in the shower. I heard knocking on the door and ignored it. Heard a knock again. Looked out the window. Nothing. Then came the cop knock. So I get up and open the door. Two cops with guns drawn were hiding behind the door frames and ask me to put my hands up. I comply. They ask, "Are you here with your girlfriend?" I'm super confused, but I say yes, because I am. They storm in and cuff me. About this time the girlfriend comes out of the shower, sees me handcuffed, and is understandably pissed. The whole time I'm asking what is going on and saying I think there has been a mistake. Then the cop points out the door to an old guy and asks, "Is this not your dad?" It wasn't, and I said no. What is going on? The cops look at the old guy and he stumbles saying, No, that is not my son." The cops turned white. They were super embarrassed and they left quickly. A couple hours later one of the cops comes back and apologizes. Apparently that old dude got a phone call from his estranged son saying he had a gun and was going to shoot his girlfriend. Don't know what came of that, but it wasn't me, and that dad apparently didn't even know where his son lived. Crazy day. Then I went and got some tacos and a margarita. Sorry to be just another person who wasn't the PO in the story. I was in high school and me and my 3 best friends were having a sleepover at one of their homes. We wanted to watch Netflix on the TV, but did not have an HDMI cord. My friend's dad said he'd drive us to Walmart to get a cord, but her older sister said she would instead. Kind of an important detail. Anyways, we make a turn out of my friend's neighborhood onto the main road and we saw sirens behind us. So my friend's sister pulled over. When the sirens did not pass us, we realized that we were being pulled over for some unknown reason. By the time we realized, the PO was already at our window. He had a really powerful voice and he yelled at my friend's sister to roll the window down. Now, by this point we are shaking and freaking out. As soon as she rolls the window down, the PO shines his flashlight at all of us. He sees 5 terrified teenage girls. Immediately he backs off. He asks for friend's sister's license. She hands it to him, and I just remember how much she was shaking. PO asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Friend's sister says, "No sir, I honestly have no idea why." PO says, "Well, it's because of the way you came out of that neighborhood." Friend's sister says, "Okay." PO asks, "Are these your sisters?" I think he's backpedaling at this point, because we are all clearly not sisters. He continues, "Well, your car matched the description of another car, so yes. Here is your license. Have a good night." After we started driving again, my friend's sister goes, "I'm so glad my dad didn't end up driving you." And I honestly think about what might have happened if he was the one who drove us a lot. Not a police officer, but I have a story of mistaken identity that happened to my brother. He rode Harleys for 20 years. He was into the Harley lifestyle, clothes, bike vacations to Sturgis and bike week etc. But he was in no way a biker. He had a custom license plate on his bike that was very desirable for Harley owners all over North America. I don't want to say what it was, but the letters HD were part of it. One day he gets a knock on his door. It was a detective that wanted to speak to him about something. My brother invited him in, and the detective started asking him a bunch of questions about his friends, who he spends time with, and where he was on a certain night a few weeks earlier. Tells him there was a double murder and the suspect was riding a Harley Davidson with his license plate and had a similar physical description. Big guy, leather jacket, black leather boots and beard. They suspected it was gang related. Hell's Angels were moving into this area at the time. After talking to my brother, he told him that he didn't think they had the right guy. He had no criminal record and no affiliation with anyone in a gang. Plus they were following him everywhere for a week. Turns out the guy they were looking for had the same type of Harley, same license plate, but from a different state or province, and looked like him. Needless to say, he changed his license plate the next day. Dispatcher here. I got 2 stories. 1. I get a call from another county, not so close to us asking about a stolen license plate or car, I can't remember which. I ran what they had, and it came back stolen and reported with our agency. The officer says they are out with the car and the registered owner, and they swear they've never reported anything stolen, and have never been to our county. Long story short, we entered it with a typo, because the dispatcher wrote out the entry log first, handwritten, and then went to the NSIC terminal, and entered it, based on their log entry. They couldn't read their own handwriting, and replaced a U and a V in the tag. What's worse is, that we second and third party check all entries. So that's another experienced dispatcher and the shift supervisor checking off on this entry. Of course no one got into trouble for this. 2. The story goes that we received a warrant confirmation request from another agency and we confirmed the warrant based on the request. Turns out, the other agency stopped out with a kid and ran them by name. Their name was similar to someone with a warrant in our county. When their dispatcher sent the confirmation request, they used the info from our warrant entry to ask if we had a warrant on that person. Well, of course we do. What kind of stupid question is that? For those wondering, you are supposed to send the request using the info your officer gives you. If they did that, we probably would have spotted the error. So this kid that's never been to our county and has never been in trouble his entire life was picked up on a warrant on Friday that wasn't his and held in that jail until Monday because it was a no bond warrant and had to wait to see a judge. Kid's father finds out who confirmed the warrant on our side and starts harassing her on Facebook. That was fun. Not a police officer, but this is pretty relevant. Sorry, it's a long one. I was at my boyfriend's, we'll call him B, apartment in Louisiana, which is in kind of a rough neighborhood. We were watching a movie on the couch, and after taking my sleeping pills, fell asleep. At about 1:30 am, there's loud banging on the door, and B gets up to investigate. My pills knock me out pretty hard, so I barely opened my eyes, and see B get yanked out the door, and about 9 officers flood the apartment. They start asking me tons of questions, and I'm barely coherent at this point. Ma'am, are you okay? Did you call the police? How long have you been asleep? What is your name? Etc. From outside the apartment, B tries telling them I fell asleep watching a movie, and they berate him for trying to answer for me. They are patting him down up against the wall outside, and are about to cuff him. They radio dispatch to call back the number that dialed 911. And are searching the apartment listening for it. I hold up my phone and tell them we didn't call the police, but they won't listen. Once I finally was able to get a word in, I ask them what this is all about. Turns out, a woman in apartment 29 was being beaten by her boyfriend, and he was dragging her around by her hair, so she called the police. I tell them this is A29, but there's also B29, C29, and D29. Suddenly they all rush to me and are baffled by this new information. They start yelling we've got a GO. We've got a GO, and suddenly they're all gone. There's dents in the door and we didn't get an apology, but I'm happy with the way they handled the situation. If I had called the police for a domestic abuse case, they made me a priority. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. I would be so grateful if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel. New videos every day.